The views and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the California Secretary of State's office. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Season 2 of This is Promote the Vote California, the podcast. I am Kalika Edwards, election analyst and outreach coordinator here at the California Secretary of State's office in the Elections Division. And this season, we are taking the conversation even further, digging into stories and ideas that connect us as Californians. And of course, I'm not hosting alone. We've got a brand new co-host joining the podcast. Cameron, do you want to take it from here and introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Cameron Petrovich, and I'm an elections analyst and outreach coordinator here at the California Secretary of State's office in the Elections Division. And I'm so excited to be here as the co-host for this brand new season of This is Promote the Vote California, the podcast. Promote the Vote California is an initiative created by the Secretary of State to promote a thriving business community that values civic engagement. We aim to foster partnerships, empower communities, and amplify voices to create a strong and inclusive California. We believe in the power of collaboration to achieve sustainable and meaningful progress. To continue Promote the Vote's mission here with the podcast, we're going to examine the intersection of democracy and everyday spaces, including businesses, communities, and workspaces. We'll continue to examine the critical role each of these spaces can play in advancing and encouraging voter participation. And we'll also explore actionable strategies to address the barriers keeping folks away from wanting to participate at the ballot box. This season, we'll be trying out a new format for Kalika and I to engage with our distinguished guests. But for our season 2 premiere, we've got something super special for you all, for all you listeners out there.
As Cameron said, Promote the Vote California is about building connections and strengthening civic engagement statewide. And in this episode, we are connecting that mission to history. The Voting Rights Act forever changed the course of our nation, knocking down barriers to the ballot box and making clear that every voice belongs in our democracy. To honor this history and reflect on the work ahead, we have gathered an extraordinary group of leaders, including our boss, California Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber, former San Francisco Mayor and California State Assembly Speaker Willie Brown, civil rights pioneer Dr. Melba Pattillo Beals, Adam Cain from Initiate Justice, and Lexie Tesch with the Sacramento chapter of the League of Women Voters. And this conversation was moderated by Guy Marzorati from KQED, recorded at our offices here at the California Secretary of State. No matter where you're tuning in from, your workplace, your commute, or your living room, settle in. This is a powerful conversation about progress, resilience, and the ongoing fight to strengthen our democracy. Let's get it started, guys. Hey Cameron, have I ever told you I love to track a package for all that online shopping I shouldn't be doing? Word on the street is you can track your vote by mail ballot too.
This time, the streets are correct. By signing up for Where's My Ballot, you can track your ballot and sign up for call, text, or email alerts, just like all those packages you shouldn't be receiving. Visit where'smyballot.sos.ca.gov to sign up today.
Good afternoon. Great. I'm Dr. Shirley Weber, California Secretary of State, and I want to welcome you to our building, to our home. And you're invited to always come to various activities at the Secretary of State's office. This is and I'm going to speak very briefly, but this is a wonderful opportunity for you to be here with us today to talk about the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We are obviously in a tumultuous situation in terms of voting rights, voting rights acts, those kinds of things. And in California, we've made it our business to try to open up voting to every legitimate citizen in California, to make sure it's easy and accessible, to have not only your vote, have you participate in voting, registering, voting and making sure that your vote counts, and that you know where to vote. You make it accessible. We talk about more days and more ways in California. You have 11 days to vote in California. There are multiple ways to vote in California. And much of that is as a result of our vision about what we should be doing, as they did in 1965 with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which we are fighting for and fighting back again for it as we speak. The interesting thing with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, my research at UCLA focused a lot upon the whole issue of civil rights and black nationalism. And one of the things that was clear during 1964 was when the president wanted to offer Martin Luther King all kinds of other things. They wanted him to have a housing act. They wanted him to have a poverty act. They wanted him to do all of these other things, but they never wanted to offer him the Voting Rights Act. And King rejected all of those in 1964 because he understood the power of voting and the importance of making it possible for all people in this nation to be able to vote, because that was their voice, that was their power, that was their expression. And so as we have tried in this office as Secretary of State to make sure that we bring forth a number of things that people have forgotten. I discovered that a lot of folks don't know much about the Voting Rights Act of 1965. They thought it granted people the right to vote when it did not. They already had the right to vote, but they had to secure the vote. They had to make sure that people had access to it, and they were not denied their opportunity to vote. So as we approached so many things, we did Fannie Lou Hamer last year. It was amazing to see a Fannie Lou Hamer statue, to fight for the right to vote, because that's a major issue in this nation and always has been. And so now this is the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Amazing time frame, 60 years in which we have fought and tried to maintain the right to vote. When I took the office a few years ago, I came to realize, as I pointed out to the governor and others, that this is going to be a critical period in our lives because we've all had an opportunity to vote. We've had this wonderful experience in this nation, and we knew that voting was under attack. And the question was always, are we as strong as our ancestors? Are we able to fight like they fought to maintain the right to vote and to exercise that right in going to the polls? So we want to remind folks of what it means to be what the Voting Rights Act of 1965 did, and those who are part of it, who lived through it, and who understood why it was so very important for us to have it. We're happy to have all of you here today, but we're also very excited about 3 members who are elected officials. We want to ask them to stand. If you're an elected official, we have 2 from the City Council in Sacramento. They're here, Lisa Kaplan and Rick Jennings. They're here. And we have also Natalie Adana, who is with the Marin County Registrar Voter. Natalie's here, great. Did we miss anyone who signed up and who was actually an elected official? We want to make sure that we acknowledge you, acknowledge your work, and acknowledge how difficult it is in these difficult times to maintain. At this time, I'd like to introduce Guy Marzorati, who is a correspondent for KQED and California's Political and Government Desk, based in San Jose. He reports on state and local politics and produces KQED's Digital Voter Guide. At this time, I give you our moderator, Guy Marzorati.
Well, thank you, Secretary Weber. Thank you all for taking the time to come out and joining us today for this panel. We have a fantastic panel here to talk about the legacy of the Voting Rights Act, along with California's own history in expanding the right to vote, and where the Voting Rights Act stands today and some of the threats that it faces at the national level. I want to introduce our distinguished panel, but first I want to give everyone a heads up that we're also going to be accepting your questions today, bringing your questions to our panelists. So we have Shannon from the Secretary of State's office, who will be going around and collecting cards. So if you have questions, fill one out. We're going to set aside some time at the end of the program to make sure we get your questions answered. So I want to introduce our panel for today. First, the Honorable Willie Brown, former mayor of San Francisco and Speaker of the California State Assembly. Thank you, Mayor Brown, for joining us.
All right.
We'll have you right next to the Secretary. Joining us virtually, Dr. Melba Pattillo Beals, who's an American journalist and educator, and also a member of the Little Rock Nine. Dr. Beals, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
We also have Adam Cain, Inside Programs Associate at Initiate Justice. Welcome, Adam. And last but not least, Lexie Tesch, Outreach Coordinator with the League of Women Voters of Sacramento County. Welcome, Lexie. Let's get into our conversation here. We have lots to cover today with this distinguished panel. And maybe what I'll ask everyone to do to start is to talk a little bit about your own work as it relates to the Voting Rights Act, and how you continue to kind of carry that work forward today to expand the right to vote and work on voting issues. And maybe Dr. Beals, we can start with you.
Absolutely, thank you. One of the things I belong to is a group of ladies that would get together, usually on Sunday afternoon with tea and toast via Zoom. And we try to write when there's a heated time. For example, we're going to take our post pretty quickly here to get ready for the next midterm election, and that is, we volunteer to write 100 letters and or cards a day, sometimes during the day, but we write together for part of that time, just chit chat and write. And the goal is to get people to come out and write. So we're in California. We do not write Californians. We write Alabamians, Texans, Louisianans, people far in the distance from where we are. And I'm really happy to be working on that. Always, since growing up in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I'm now 83 years of age, understand that I did see this country at a time when you could not vote. I remember accompanying my grandmother to vote when I was a little girl, holding her hand. And we got to the spot where we were told white people were voting only. These guys started throwing beer cans at her. And I remember that distinctly. I remember the time when people were charged tax, remember that, to vote? And then when you had to count the number of jelly beans in a jar and tell them what you thought that number was if you're going to vote. So I have always been and will always be a person who supports efforts to get everybody out to vote, Republican, Democrat, or whatever. It's my belief that we've gotten torn up in this battle of whether we are or aren't. And it's not about the war. It's about, is the person you're voting on someone who's moving your agenda forward, making you feel peaceful, and someone you'd like to be introduced to your grandchildren or your children, and someone who you're proud to tell them that you voted for.
And Secretary Weber, like Dr. Beals, you are from Arkansas. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your family's journey to Southern California during this time, during this period where Black Americans were fighting, were organizing for civil rights and voting rights.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we came to California because my father was going to be lynched. He was a person who fought back at the way station. A man hit him and he hit him back. He refused to pay him what he was due. He was a sharecropper, and he refused to take less than what he was owed. As a result, they made a plan to lynch my father. His family had to sneak him out of Arkansas in the middle of the night, bringing him to Texarkana, where he took a train and came to where my grandmother was, my mother's mother, in Los Angeles. And that's how we end up 3 months later coming to California. My father was adamant about his right to vote, his right to be heard, his right to have the dignity that was there. So much so that my father never let us ever say yes ma'am and no ma'am, ever in our life. I've never even said it to anyone, because my father would not let us say that. He said, until we get the kind of rights that we deserve, we don't need to call other people yes ma'am and no ma'am when they were not calling you the same thing. So I grew up with this sense of, you fight for what you want, and you work very hard to get it. So when my parents came to California, the first thing they did was register to vote. And when the voting place off of 45th and Broadway, there was no other place around in that area to vote. There was no library, there was no rec center. The school was there, but it was small. All these things, we didn't have any place to vote. And so my mother volunteered, my mother volunteered our home, and my house became a polling place. And I grew up watching people come in and out, and my dad telling them why they needed to vote. And as a result, till my mother's death, our house was a polling place at 351 West 45th Street. She believed in it so much so that all of us registered to vote. All of my nieces, my nephews, it doesn't matter who they are, they have to vote because their grandmother and their grandfather was adamant about the right to vote. And like I said, I grew up with this vision in middle school. I walked down the driveway on election day. I knew every election Los Angeles had. because my mother, our house was the polling place, and people, they used to call her the voting lady, and they came to our home to vote, and we grew up with that. And we also grew up going to Arkansas and seeing what was happening there, the lack of opportunity, the lack of right to vote, the subservient behavior that people were a part of, and eventually that changed. But that was very much a part of my cousins' and relatives' perspective. But my dad refused to have it, and he fought, and he denied a lot of things in life, but he was assured of the fact that he was going to vote every election, and he did till the day he died.
And Mayor Brown, during this period of time, I know you were deeply involved in the fight against housing discrimination in San Francisco. These were the days of real estate discrimination and dummy buyers. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you were doing even before you first won elected office in fighting these type of discriminations in the city of San Francisco?
Well, first and foremost, I am from Texas, and you know that Texans were informed about democracy at the end of the rainbow, 2 years after Emancipation Proclamation. We didn't get the message until 2 years later. So therefore, in my time period, I frankly don't remember until coming to California at 17 years of age, anybody in Mineola on the black side voting or even talking about voting. There was no such thing as a NAACP. There was no such thing as a church movement that advocated voting. That just was not part of any of the agenda, frankly. So at 17 years of age, when I came to California,
And then we're just gonna swap this out. Let's see if that one's a little.
Is that better?
That's better. There we go. Yeah.
All right. At 17 years of age, when I came to California, I was not at all acquainted with voting. I had graduated from high school. There was no such thing as anybody discussing voting in Mineola in 1951. So it's a long time ago. And when I got to California, however, one of the first things that I ran into was the necessity at San Francisco State College at that time, university now, but San Francisco State College. I was literally recruited for membership in a political operation called the voting chapter of some organization in San Francisco, orchestrated by a guy named John Burton, who was obviously one of the white boys that graduated from high school in San Francisco, and he literally wondered aloud why I wasn't focused on voting. I didn't know what he was talking about exactly, but I quickly became familiar with the idea of voting, and as a matter of fact, with the idea of doing more than voting. I became familiar with the idea of maybe black kids could go to the same schools as white kids, or at least do something similar for educational purposes. And the black teachers, only black teachers, there was no such thing as black kids going to white schools or going to schools where there were any white folk, period. There was no such thing as black kids going to school where the content of what you were being exposed to for educational purposes was equal, if not as good as white folk, period. So that was part of the conversation almost from the first day that I entered at 17 years of age, college in San Francisco. And from that moment on, the question of what else is there that I don't have that I am entitled to that we ought to go get. And so from 17 on, the focus was on equality. And it wasn't just on voting. It was on every aspect of equality, on every aspect, period. Well, it was fairly rigid in pursuit thereof at San Francisco State College. And it was amazing because I was fully aware that black students who graduated from high school, my sisters, first, they had to leave Mineola, Texas, for the last 2 grades. High school stopped at 10. If you wanted to go to 11 and 12, you had to go to some other town nearby. And that was Galveston, Texas, where my sisters went to school, graduated from high school in Galveston, Texas. My mother and grandmother in particular was adamant that there were black colleges, one called Texas College in Tyler, Texas, one called Jarvis Christian College, not too far from Mineola, another one called Wiley College in a place called Marshall, and another one called Prairie View A&M, not too far away from Houston in Hempstead, Texas. And of course, if you graduated and you got out of high school and you ended up at one of those black colleges, you were kind of the cat's meow. Right. I got a scholarship to one of those black colleges, and I hesitate to talk about it, frankly, because I got thrown out of that black college. I got sent home for protesting. And I was not protesting voting. I was not protesting class location, subject matter. I was protesting food, period, because the nerds, as I now identify with, were at one table, but there would be 7 other folk at that same table, and they were usually football, basketball, track, and those kinds of things. And we nerds, all their own scholarships, had that food passed around, but it never got to us. And so I organized the nerds.
Nerds Right platform. That's
Yeah, well, no, but obviously you might get sent home.
Yeah.
And I got sent home for organizing the nerds, and my mother was so humiliated that she instantly got me squared away to head to California. Best thing she ever did to me.
Well,
because that's where I got connected to the idea that you could actually vote and protest and raise unholy hell about your conditions.
yes. And Lexie, this is the work that you're doing today, getting folks involved at the college level. Can you talk a little bit about your work there? Because this is, a population that is not always the most civically engaged, even when the rights do exist.
Yeah, I would say that there are many ways we're working on getting college students involved, and even high school students. So we also go to high schools to pre-register 16 and 17-year-olds so that when they are 18, they can register to, or they are already registered to vote. When it comes to engaging college students, I would say meeting them where they're at. They're in class, they're at the library, they're on social media. So those are a lot of efforts that we're taking right now. I table a lot on Sacramento State's campus. With the League, we often go to all the community colleges in the area as well. When it comes to social media, we make sure to create factual infographics that can be reposted because, sometimes if they're not at school, they're on Instagram, or sometimes even at school on Instagram. So that's another outlet we can use to reach students where they're at. And then I would say, just overall making sure that you're connecting it to their daily lives is another way to really get youth involved, because sometimes, we're busy with class, we're busy with work and life, and, navigating this awkward period of, turning into a doll and leaving childhood behind. So connecting it to, who local elections are something I very much emphasize. Who are you going to want to vote for? Who's going to make decisions on who's filling the potholes in the streets or something like that? Or, when it comes to higher education, talking to them at the state level too. So yeah, I would say that meeting them where they're at is important, making sure that you're making it something personal for them, and also sharing your own personal experience is important. So yeah.
And Adam, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your work with voting rights. How did it begin for you? How did you first start getting into the work that you currently do with Initiate Justice?
Hello, everyone. I got involved, honestly, through a survey. So I'm formerly incarcerated. I served 14 and a half years in prison, made some bad choices as a child. It got me sent to prison. And so while I was in prison, I was going through this transformation and this journey of like change and growth. And so in 2016, I had a friend that sent me a survey, and this survey was asking me questions that I've never got asked before as someone that was incarcerated. I grew up in a two-parent home, so seeing my mom and my dad vote was very, very important. Like I would literally go with my mom, right? And then my roots come from Birmingham, right? So I was exposed to a lot of things in that realm of democracy, policy, et cetera, et cetera. Getting back to the story of me being incarcerated, it just made sense for me to make copies and pass them out to everyone, right? And that was my first initiation to actually organizing. We was working on a bill to get passed that was called Prop 57, and this bill would open up the door for people that's doing positive programming to earn more credit and more time off. And I worked on that bill from inside. And so that was my first time getting involved. And then I just continued to do the work. So much so that I was able to parole 4 years early as a firefighter for the state of California. And then, thank you. And then from there, just got reacclimated with society, continued to rebuild my life, and then I got offered a job at Initiate Justice because I already had experience of what inside organizing looked like. What a lot of people don't really know or understand about people that are incarcerated, they are very, very, very actively involved into democracy because of the prison politics that they learn from watching on TV. And so once I learned that, I was like, okay, this is how I could get involved. And then Initiate Justice come around, and we just continue to push and to make change and open up other voting rights for people that are coming home. If you're on parole or probation, you can vote. So I worked on that proposition as well, which was Proposition 17 back in 2020. So that's how I got involved. And we do a lot of legislation. We do a lot of organizing. We use an inside-outside approach, working from the bottom to the top, bottom meaning everyday people, speaking and connecting with senators, assembly members, mayors, et cetera. So that's how I got involved.
I mean, a lot of people might not even know until 2020, California was one of those states where even if you were out, you were on parole, you didn't have the right to vote. What was the campaign like for that? I mean, this is during the pandemic. How did you kind of build that education and that coalition to people to kind of spread that message and ultimately get a statewide proposition on the ballot through the legislature and passed?
Yeah, great question. So I was actually inside working on that because I paroled in 2020, like towards the end. So it had already passed, right? But I would say, honestly, it's just connecting with the people and getting them involved. That's something that we did, right? Because a lot of people don't know about democracy, right? And so once we share with them and get them involved, then people start to learn more. So we was providing education, even, everyday people. I was talking to someone yesterday that I was like, I don't even get involved with voting. I'm like, what? Because they don't really know the knowledge, right? And so first we had to educate them. And not only that, we had to explain to people, the difference between someone that's on parole and parolee, right? Labeling is one of the key things that can either influence you to be productive, or it can be something that make you, take a step back. And so it was through hard work of organizers getting surveys, working day and night with senators, assembly members, late night conversations, whether it's a conversation at Starbucks, but just pretty much spreading the word. And once we got momentum, and as we know, right, once you get momentum, you do not want to lose it. So now we're utilizing all the platforms, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, letter writing, whatever it is. That's how we was able to influence and be able to get. That's how we was able to get people involved. Like I said, a lot of people didn't know about a person on parole, but they knew of a parolee based on social media. So, you know, that survey really is what changed people's mind, because we explained to them and we shared the knowledge with them.
But it sounds like both for you and Secretary Weber, that spark for democracy, that interest kind of started early in your childhood. I'm wondering, Dr. Beals, if that was the case for you, who were those people, you know, early on in your life that motivated you to have the courage you did as a member of the Little Rock Nine? Because I'm sure a lot of people saw those photos, they look at the history and say, you know, how could such young people have so much courage? Who were those people in your life who kind of motivated you and pushed you to do that?
Well, for me, the essential one would have been my grandmother, who was very interested in terms of what she did. She worked as a maid in white ladies' kitchens, and she would bring home the stuff that they would throw away, like their old books, and she would recover them. And, you know, all the stuff that I studied with earlier, because we were very poor, came from the trash piles of those homes that she worked in. And she would come home and she would put together something that she wanted to study. And because I had something, you know, called whooping cough, I had to sit on her lap a lot. And so by the time I was 3, 4, 5, I was reading the Bible. And so I was very inspired. I would say to her, why is it like this? I was a renegade. I mean, when I was small, she said, look, Melba, write things in your diary. Don't say things. Because she said I was eventually going to get us killed, because I was quite vocal in my issue as to, look, if the white people are in charge, why don't we do Jan to June and let them do July to December? Why are they in charge all the time? Why can't we sit in the front of the bus? Why can't I swim? Why can't I go ride that merry-go-round? And why are they throwing beer cans at us when we're voting? So I was not the ordinary little girl. I was angry from the beginning. So angry that she used to say to me, look, write letters to God. This is all going to change. And so by the time I got to Central High School, when I was 15, of course, I was quite aware of Martin Luther King. He came down to Little Rock to meet with us, talk to us. I read about him, knew essentially who he was. And so I was blessed to be surrounded by people who were activists. My mother was the first African American to ever attend the local white university to get her doctorate. And so I was bathed in people who were busy making changes, and I had no choice but to become one of them. And I was also very angry about the way we were treated from the beginning, because I would go to the grocery store with my parents, and I would see that if someone white stepped in line, we had to get out. And I didn't want to stand there forever waiting to have my groceries checked. So you forget, I come up in Little Rock, Arkansas in the 1940s. That was ugly. So there's no chance I don't want to vote. I don't understand why people don't understand how relevant voting is to their existence yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
You know, Secretary Weber, it's striking to hear Dr. Beals talk about the activism, and I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of the history with the Voting Rights Act, and specifically the connection between activism and policymaking. Dr. King was jailed in Selma. Days later, he was in the White House talking to the president about a Voting Rights Act. What is that interplay, both then and now, and the importance of it between activism and then the policymaking?
Well, I hope folks realize, and I sometimes wonder as I look at what we're doing today, is whether or not people understand the connection between your right to vote and the outcome from voting, as well as the politics that is there. We've done a lot of things with the community in terms of voting, whether it's the vote by mail issue, or whether it's allowing young men who are incarcerated, those who are on probation and parole, the right to vote. those kinds of things that didn't exist for many places in California and still don't exist across the nation, that we've opened those opportunities. But what it takes always when you're going to make change, at least I've discovered in terms of the things I've done in California in the legislature, is that you have to have an army with you. You know, you can talk in small terms, but you must have an army. And you must have an army of informed people who are willing to participate and who are willing to come to the Capitol, willing to go to their city council offices, go to their assembly members' offices, and let them know exactly what you expect. The power of voting is really the power of controlling your life. And that's why people try to get those who are poor and those without not to vote, not to believe that they have any reason to vote, and then to act upon that voting in terms of who you choose and whether or not you elect them and re-elect them. And it becomes important that we do that, because if not, then we've had what we've always had, individuals who were elected but never produced any results for us, never actually fought the battle in the Capitol and in the legislature to make sure that those changes took place. And it's amazing to me that when I was at UCLA or San Diego State or wherever, or UCSD, the activism was so important. And I used to tell young people all the time, as many young people in the university system, the Cal State, UC, community colleges, if all of these students voted, these people wouldn't be raising your fees every other year. There would be no reason for that, because they would be afraid that you would actually remember and vote your conscience and vote your interest. And it's interesting to me, especially when we deal with young people and getting them to vote, sometimes they don't connect the dots in terms of what happens when you don't vote, and then also what happens when you have nothing to vote for, because the people who you're voting for don't have your interest at all. But you still have to be vigilant about it, and you have to go out there and you fight for it. When I got into the assembly, there were a lot of things that young people didn't do, but because I came out of the university with a whole lot of students, they took the charge to basically do most of the things we were talking about doing. We've interesting little things like we got food stamps on campuses. They didn't allow you to use your EBT card at a campus to eat. And yet we had a lot of students who on welfare who needed to eat on campus and not have to go somewhere else. So the students organized, they organized me to do this for them, and we carried this bill forward. And we got EBT cards on every campus in Cal State system. It's amazing how they told us initially that we couldn't get it done. They told us that use an EBT card for every card would cost $250,000. That's what they told us at the beginning, $250,000. It cost $250 when we figured it out. But they were counting in everything they wanted to count to keep us from doing it. So these students are smart, and if you get them to their interest level, you're going to see them doing things. I passed a bill that refused a lot of Cal State system to raise fees on students without their permission. Those excellent fees is what they called them. And different campuses would add $300, $400 to this campus or that campus, and they could do that with the president's permission. We passed a bill that can't do it anymore unless the students vote to have it. And if the students vote against it, you're not going to raise their fees unnecessarily just because you want to do something for a faculty member or to give them greater salary or whatever it may be with these excellent fees. So the ability to translate the voting into action is extremely important, because once you realize that, you will always go vote. You will see what the consequences are from voting when you don't vote and you don't get anything, versus when you vote and you actually can change your campus, you can change your community, you can get things done in your community where it's difficult to do. When I was on the school board, the most difficult reality for me was I served the lowest economic community in San Diego on the school board. And when I would go for things, they would want to deny me these things that were needed in this poor community. When the affluent community came in with little or nothing in terms of asking, they got almost everything they wanted. And I had to take this to community and say, listen, these people vote in 80 and 90%. You folks vote in 30. Add it up. They're not afraid of you. They know you're not going to ever go out to protest against them. And so I made it an action in my community wherever I was, even if I didn't have opposition running against me, I had everybody go vote. Because I said, something gonna be on there that you can vote against or vote for. And you need to do this, so when I speak up and I have my voice on the board, people respond because why? Because I'm not only going to tell them what we need, what I want, and if you don't give it to us, I'm going to go out and organize against you. And people then begin to realize, okay, it's not just to vote this thing for Shirley because it's a happy experience. No, there are consequences for for voting in the wrong direction. And once you empower folks to do that, it's amazing what happens. It's amazing when you come to the legislature. And I was sitting to get one of the bills, and members got up and started going out so they wouldn't have to vote. And when they got to their office, who was waiting there was somebody on my coalition. Where you going? Are you going to vote? Yeah, I'm going to vote. Well, okay, I'll wait for you. And they would bring them back to the committee to vote because this was their district in their community. So it's important that we make that connection because voting is important, but people need to understand you can get things done if you organize yourself, utilize that power of voting, and get the things you need for your community.
And you mentioned briefly at the beginning of our program, 1965, there was a lot of national leaders coming to Dr. King with other items for the top of the agenda. What do you think it was about the need for a Voting Rights Act? Because there were people at the time who said, no, we have Justice Department lawyers, they can file lawsuits against county. What was it about the need for voting rights in legislation?
When you don't have the power to vote, to actually use your vote to get the things done, you have no power at all. You have none at all. And we saw this in the South all the time, where they wouldn't let certain people run for office. Or they gerrymandered so that when you voted, you were still voting for the same people because there was no power in any of those votes, because there's no one being voted upon that could actually speak for you. And so when you don't vote, you have no voice. I used to tell folks who come to the school board when I was in the school board, I said, listen, these people pay you no attention, and they don't pay you any attention for good reason, because you ain't gonna do nothing. You're not gonna show up to vote. You're not gonna show up to deal with these issues. You go down there and you mow, but you don't follow through. And people had to learn. I had to basically educate the community on when these things happen, you have to go forward and you have to do things and you have to show the consequences of what is there. Without that, you're just going through the performance. And I said, and it's horrible when you have nothing to vote for, and it's equally horrible when you have basically no one who's voting. And so it's critically important in most communities. I encourage, I tell every parent, don't feed your kid if they don't vote. Don't bring them, I tell your teenage kids, they come to your house, you can't eat here. You don't vote, you don't even exist. You can't help you get some groceries because you're not voting. And I tell that to parents all the time, and they go tell the kids, you can't come over here and eat no more if you don't vote. Make them vote. They have to have a voice. You brought them in this world, make them stand up and be that voice. And so I tell them in a minute, if you don't vote, I'm not feeding you. Any relative, every kid, anybody come to my house, you don't vote, you can't eat. Do something else with yourself, but don't come over here.
That sounds like an effective vote whipping strategy.
Yes.
Willie Brown, at this time, 1960s, you're in the California State Assembly. You were eventually Speaker of the California State Assembly. How do you approach these issues of voting rights, and how did you weigh it with many of your other competing priorities, namely electing Democrats, trying to keep a Democratic majority in order in the State Assembly? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, let's start with Brown versus the Board of Education was May 1994. 54. May 17th, 1954. And it's almost, we take it almost for granted that something significant occurred on that date. Yes, there was a change briefly in the rules, but there's no enforcement of that change in the rules. So if I had to leave Mineola to graduate from high school, another black school, there's no way that meant anything unless there was a full implementation of all the principles in this democracy for everybody, period. So 1954 did not award that. Now I'm about 3 years in college, and my sisters had all graduated from Tyler, Texas College. They'd graduated from the schools that they had managed to get into, all black schools. There's still, the voting business was not producing any form of equality. This democracy was not producing any form of equality. Move forward, all of the organizing that was done by all these black people, by now the churches had really become comfortable, and that by now the NAACP had hooked up with other organizations, not on the black side. Everybody connected in any fashion with a labor organization in which there were black members had begun to talk about things beyond Brown versus the Board of Education. And then you flowed in to the early 60s when the students began to insist that there was something other than just Brown versus Board of Education. There was an absolute right to be full participants in every aspect, in particular sitting at the lunch-size counters and doing the things that Stokely Carmichael and that whole crowd had begun to do in pursuit of equality. Clearly, none of that was as effective as when Lyndon Johnson, with King and others present, signed the Voting Rights Act, because from that moment on, the business of black votes began to impact who would be making the decisions and enforcing the rights, period. And so that is something that I don't think people really appreciate how significant that really was. We didn't have, black students were not as powerful as black students are today, simply because they had begun to organize, but not to the extent that they could effectively change things, because not enough of them were showing up to cast the votes. When that began to be a reality, where anybody wanted to be elected to public office, not necessarily black, but other people wanted to be elected to public office, it became clear you had to get every vote in the housing project if you really wanted to win. You had to get the vote in every one of the organizations of which black people were members, like the organizations called fraternities and sororities. You had to get organized and really be focused on being obedient to the whole business of voting. There was no such thing in the early part of the town of absentee voting unless you could prove that you were dead or some other form of disability before you were allowed to do what we now do. We did all those things, all for the single purpose of getting everybody to vote, every single solitary soul to vote. And to that extent, we began to have a profound impact on the decision made in this country in every one of the categories. And we could still be just that effective if we just had the commitment that Shirley's parents had early on, because voting was risk-taking of your life in the early part of the voting process. It was no joke that if you showed up to vote, there might be a barrier, and that barrier might be you had to prove something beyond the fact that you were a citizen. You had to prove that you had enough money in the bank, so to speak, You had to almost buy your way into the voting booth. This nation had barriers by those who had literally controlled this nation for so long, and all of that control came from the voting box.
I'm sure, Lexie, Adam, you all feel like you're standing on the shoulders of giants when you're pursuing the work that you are in advancing the right to vote. What is that next kind of frontier? We have these fundamental voting rights that have been secured in this country, but what's the work you still hope to do in the years, decade ahead?
Yeah, I would say that the next steps I see are, I guess while you two were speaking, it made me think of the importance of organizing. And when it comes to organization, getting everyone to meet in a room is important, but the really significant step is follow-up and following through and making sure that things are enforced. So I think that right now is an important time where we start to organize and educate people, but then following through, when it comes to voting, the first part is letting them know how to register to vote, helping them register to vote, explain what voting is and the basic education that comes with it. And then once it comes to the election season, making sure that they know how to get the right information from nonpartisan sources, from factual sources. And then when it comes to actually turning in the ballot and then afterwards, looking at the aftermath that, what your vote actually does. So that's one thing that comes to mind when we discuss what we want to see happen in the future. And ultimately, I think what I really want to see is just everyone show out. I want to see everyone at the polls. I want to see everyone turning in mail-in ballots. I want to make sure that everyone's honestly having conversations. I think that this is a time period where people can feel nervous to speak up and they can feel nervous to ask hard questions, but we need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable right now and make sure that we are connecting, because at the end of the day, we're all people, we're all a part of a community, and what makes a home are the people. And so what makes a community is also the people, and ultimately what makes a strong community is those that participate in the community. So that's what I would like to see happen next.
And Adam, we were even talking before, you pass an initiative like Prop 17, that doesn't mean people know about it right away, right? There's still it seems like there's still education to be done. What are the things that you're looking forward in the future when it comes to voting rights for people who are system impacted? There are states out there where you never lose the right to vote if you're incarcerated. California is not one of those states. Is that something that you might be working on in the years ahead?
Yeah, for sure. We actually worked on it. I believe it might have been last year or the year before. I want to say it was last year. Working on so many bills, I start to forget, and then amongst other things I do. But getting back to the topic, just continue to spread the word, right? Making sure that parole and probation are sharing with people that they can vote, right? And that's starting to be done now. But not only that, even when people are coming home, right, in the parole packet, they know that you can vote, right? In my parole, when I paroled, I had a parole packet, and they were so quick to give me this semi-credit card, not really a credit card, like a debit card, where my money was on there and I signed for it. But even when I signed for it, it was so many things that was done wrong with that, right? And I'm using this for an example because it's like, if you can give me my parole money on a debit card and make me sign for it, then I should be able to know that I'm coming home and I should vote, right? So those are things that's starting to be done now, right? It's taking some time, but even taking a deeper look at that, people that are inside, once again, and I do want to be clear about this because I don't want to ruffle any feathers, right? I understand people have their feelings and reservations about people that are incarcerated and they feel like they shouldn't vote, right? The reality of it is most people are coming home to a community. So if we really want to start to change the trajectory of people that are incarcerated coming home, then that means we have to make them feel a part of the community. A lot of people that are incarcerated, even before they got incarcerated, didn't feel like they was a part of the community. I get it all the time. I can walk down the street and I have so many people crossing the street trying to get away from me until they hear what I do, not only just in the realm of being an activist, but then when they hear about me doing entertainment, now they want to be buddy-buddy, right? But like I'm saying, if we can be able to get them involved now, right, then I think we would have a better chance of looking at what democracy looks like going forward. You know, and I think that's very, very important for people to understand. And and I share this with everyone here. If you have family, friends, whatever, and they are on parole, probation, please let them know to get involved. Please let them know, because this is how we're going to be able to say, you know, to make that change, right? Like some of the greats done before me, right? As I sit amongst this panel, right? Even with Doctor on the screen, right? So that's what we're looking forward to do, especially with Initiate Justice. We are legislation. We are an organization that push for policy, right? For the rights, not only just people that are incarcerated, but across the board, getting people involved, using an inside-outside approach. And so I feel like to continue to move that, everybody need to be a part of the conversation, even the ones that's inside. They need to be a part of the conversation.
And Secretary Weber, I know this is an issue you've worked on for a long time in your office, and it's coming a time too of realignment within the California criminal justice system, where, you know, people are moving down to the county level. There might just be simple confusion about what is my voting rights, what's my voting status. Can you talk a little bit about how your office approaches these issues and making sure people who have the right to vote in California know that they have the right to vote in the state?
Well, it's extremely important because people are still very confused about what people's rights are. I was, when I first came into the assembly, I was appalled at the fact that as I was talking to even some lobbyists, they didn't know that once you have served your time that you had a right to vote. That shocked me, because these are folks who are making money and working at the Capitol, and they were lobbyists, and when they heard I had a bill that was dealing with that, they were like, people can vote once they get out of jail? Yeah. And I was really talking about the other issues in terms of probation and parole. But they didn't know, they figured that once you went in jail, you could never vote again in California. And I'm not sure where they got that information from, but these were people who work in the Capitol and deal with legislation. It is very important, and we've made it possible through some legislations to make sure that certain communities can get in jail. And get in those communities that are there and pass information out. We just basically signed up and we began the beginning of this year, because we've been working with the Department of Corrections for many years, and they're very hesitant and reluctant to share information. They don't even want to give you just a flyer that says, now that you're out, you can vote. I mean, you know, they said it costs too much to print a flyer. I mean, that's what they told me. You know, it's kind of crazy stuff. But my staff stayed on it. We stayed with it. We went through the whole process. And now we have all these meetings with everyone who's getting out on parole or probation. They have a meeting with CDCR. Our staff is there to explain to them exactly what their rights are, to register them to vote, to make sure that they understand that once they are no longer incarcerated, that they have the right to vote. And there's only really one category, actually, for a person who can't vote, and that's if they're a citizen, and that is a person who's physically sitting in a state or federal prison on a felony. If you're not physically in one of those, even if you're in jail, just in the county jail, you still have the right to vote. And so California gives you that right. Many people don't understand it, don't know it, and yet it's really simple. If you're not on that one category, you have a right to register and to vote if you're a citizen in California. And so we have been pushing that. We've got a lot of folks who registered to vote. I forgot the number. Our staff goes to the hearings, to the meetings every year, every I guess month or every 2 months, and sit down with the folks in CDCR, sit down with the parole, the individuals, and give them their rights and help them to understand. We tried to rely upon the correction department. They were not reliable in terms of consistently getting this information out. There are a lot of people who work in all these different communities and organizations in California, and they've been very successful in helping people understand that. We get into the churches, so the churches understand, because many of them will think, well, once you've committed a felony, you can never vote again in California. That is not correct at all. And so we print the material out, we get it there. I have a staff of individuals, many of them are here, who organize that for us, and we work with community organizations to make sure that when they're going out and doing things, that they get that information. So it's because of the history of how folks who were incarcerated were treated in the South and other places. People just believe that in California, once you committed a felony, you could no longer vote. And so they didn't even try to vote. I remember when I was running for the assembly, there was a young man who came, this woman had recruited him, and he came to my office every day to work on my campaign. And he would stand on the corner with signs, he'd get in there and he'd do things, he'd send off letters, all that stuff. And he worked for us for months. And he finally said to me one day, Dr. Weber, he said, you know what? This is the first time in my life that I really wish I could vote. I said, why can't you vote? And he got quiet and he said, I'm an ex-felon. I said, you can vote. This man had been out of prison for about 20 years and did not know that he could not vote. So we got him a card immediately, signed him up. The day of election, he was so happy. It was the first time that he actually had a chance to vote. And he had the right all along. But he was so embarrassed that he didn't want to tell his minister and others that he was an ex-felon. We used to have to go into churches where the minister would take his list of all his members at one of our churches, and he would check to see who had voted. And he'd go down to the polling place because he knew where all his people lived and see if they voted. And they would tell him, I voted, I voted, I voted. He said Sunday morning, everybody raising their hand, they voted. And then when he looked at the rolls, maybe 50% of them actually voted. He discovered, as he talked with them, that most of them had been ex-felons and didn't want him to know that. They were so embarrassed. And so he had to do a whole sermon on who can vote, and he got all his folks to register, and they all started showing up at voting polls. The lack of information is amazing on that particular issue. And CDCR is not going to tell them voluntarily. They're not going to tell them, now that you're out, you can vote. If you ask them, they'll give you the answer, but they're not going to make it easy for you to get it. And so our folks have been working with them at every meeting, and we're doing that. Okay, got some questions?
Just make sure if you do have a question for anyone here on the panel, your question gets to me and gets to our panel. Despite all of the work that all of you are doing, we still know that there are challenges to the Voting Rights Act. There are still, barriers, and there are still threats to this piece of legislation, even decades later. So I want to ask you all for kind of your view on the perspective of these challenges. And maybe Dr. Beals, I'll start with you, and from where you sit, the challenges that you see to voting rights in our current environment, both politically but also legally, that still face this legislation, even as we sit here today celebrating it.
It's absolutely frightening. Do you hear me?
I can, yes, thank you.
We must be really authentic in our desire to commit ourselves to this one thing. It is our way out, and perhaps the only way out. It is scary to face what we're surrounded with these days. I get a chill when somebody says poll tax. I get a chill when somebody says voter ID. I get a chill when somebody says, well, you got to show your birth certificate, your maiden name. Give me a list of what you want. Everything done like that is cutting off the poor, cutting off those people who can't take the time and energy to do all that. And so we must put our time and energy this time. There can be no slacking. It has to be the main project that we get going, and we have to be serious about it in every way, shape, or form, because there's no alternative. We are sitting in a position that I've not seen since I was a little girl. And to me, I'm most frightened than I've ever been in Little Rock. I mean, I was frightened as a child with a mob. I had enough stuff going on in my life that a president saw it fit to send to send the U.S. Army, the 101st Airborne, to protect me. When you're standing in front of a mob, I'm just that frightened today about what's happening to our democracy. I really think that we have to turn our energy and our lights and all that we have. I'm looking in the closet, those old boots I wore to march for voters' right, time to get them down and hold them in my wheelchair, whatever. Go your walker, go however you got to go, but we got to get it going.
Yeah. I mean, it was just over 10 years ago, the Supreme Court struck down a key piece of the Voting Rights Act, ended federal oversight over states that had a history of discrimination. I'm curious, Willie Brown, Secretary Weber, whether you see the rest of the Voting Rights Act at risk here with the current Supreme Court and the current situation, leadership, whatever you want to call it, that we have in Washington?
We're not going to enjoy democracy in this country unless somehow 100% of the people who are 18 years of age and over have registered to vote and in fact show up to so cast those votes. Voting Rights Act does not command that, period. High school graduation doesn't command that, period. We, the people, need to demand that of ourselves and of our relatives and our friends and of our acquaintances. Because believe me, that when the poll tax, as referenced earlier, was put in place, it was to keep us from voting. It was to keep people from voting, period. All of the barriers that have been created in organizations at the governmental level was designed to remove whatever privilege you're getting from the Voting Rights Act. And so I often wonder why that high school diploma that I got ultimately and everybody else got didn't carry with it the authorization to vote and the encouragement in that authorization to vote. Even the graduation degree from college and law school didn't carry with it any commitment or need glaringly to cast votes. We really do need to make the world of democracy more inviting, more interesting, and easier for us to cast votes, period. There are organizations and individuals, particularly in the South from whence I emerged, that want desperately to not have you vote. There's no way for them to control. For an example, Mississippi, I think, still has more black people than they have anybody else, any other ethnicity. And it is maybe the most difficult place to still cast ballots. Well, if all of the things associated with ballot casting carried with it the privilege and the obligation and the encouragement, Mississippi would be a different place. I might even go back to run in Mississippi. I may go back to run for governor in Mississippi, but that's not the way it is in our country. We still are not committed by our people to really go vote. So the Voting Rights Act, while we ought to always acknowledge and celebrate it, it's only the beginning.
And Secretary Weber, there's a lot of concern that the Supreme Court has taken up a Voting Rights Act case this year, and there's, I think, a lot of concern that they could even go so far as to strike down Section 2, which protects against race-based gerrymandering. Is that a concern you share?
Of course, it's quite a concern that we share, and we're fighting it. And our legal staff, every time there is a case, we're on those cases. We're doing the amicus briefs. So we're doing everything we can to fight that back. And even though we talk about Mississippi and all those places, don't forget California and voter ID. I mean, you know, when you read about that, and people say, well, you don't have voter ID. We do. Quite an extensive voter ID program, and we do that. But what they want to add to it will take not only the rights from a number of people to right to vote, but it'll take away a lot of women who can't vote. And they're pretty happy about that because you have to have a birth certificate in your married name. And most women don't have birth certificates in their married name. And so as a result, you would not be able to register to vote in California. So there are a lot of things that are happening not only across the nation, but in California and elsewhere where people are putting in these barriers to keep people from voting. And it's really important because they make up stuff as they go along. You know, I know in Florida, a bill passed and allowed those who are ex-offenders to be able to vote again. You remember what they did that? Then they said, well, you can't vote unless you paid all your taxes. Now, they didn't ask everybody to pay their taxes, but only those who were and they basically taxed a number of people who didn't have any taxes. And just so happened the guy who owns Microsoft came up and paid everybody's taxes so they can vote in Florida. But they had actually, once the bill had passed, and they think of something new, and another barrier, and another challenge. So it is a serious issue, and which ought to wake people up, because you should stop and say, why is there such a focus on voting? It must be very important. It must be very important. If there's such a focus over the last 150 years on just who can vote and who can't vote and under what circumstances, and what could put you in a position where you never vote again, or you have to write the governor and ask for permission to be able to vote again because you're an ex-felon, and it goes on and on and on. And we have to be aware of it. And it doesn't stop at California's door. We are forever being challenged. We have a challenge with us legally in Orange County. You can't have voter ID in California in the way they want it. And they're still challenging us, and we're fighting them back and forth. But that's right here in Orange County, in California. And we'll see more of those things. Huntington Beach, yeah, in the Orange County area. I mean, those things, even though their own district attorney said they couldn't do it, and they told them they couldn't, they did it anyway. The city council did it anyway. And so we're locked in a case with them. And so given the nature of our court system right now, you're not sure what the consequences will be or what the end will be. And that's why it's so important that as we talk about voting, we talk about all the things that are related to it, all the things that are part of it that we sometimes don't realize, that if you don't register to vote, you can't serve on a jury. So you can't be a part of the jury, the peers of your people, if you're not registered to vote. And so those things people forget about, that there are lots of things that come with being a citizen and the right to vote and your participation that determines not only your life, but the life of your neighbors and friends and family. So it's extremely important. And that's why King would not accept anything else except for the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Well, we want to take some time now to get to all of your questions before we wrap up for the evening. First question is, how do you address the discouraged voters that voted in the presidential election, and even with winning the popular vote, the Electoral College makes the final decision? Maybe, Lexie, I can throw this to you in a variation of this. I'm sure you hear from young people all the time who feel like, well, will my vote even make a difference? If I take the time to register, if I take the time to fill out a ballot, will it even make a difference? What's the message you give?
Yeah, I would say that the message I would give is to encourage them to show out for every election. You know, sometimes you may not get the results you want, but that shouldn't discourage you from not participating. You know, think of it like sports. Sometimes you're not going to win every game, but you get back up, you get back on the field, you get back on the court, and you show up, and you always give your best. And so I think that is something. And when it comes to feeling discouraged as a young person nowadays, you know, it's easy to be distracted, going on social media, going out, you know, thinking that these things don't affect your everyday life. But I think once that light switches on where you can recognize, you know, as everyone has kind of said today, that, you know, everything is political. And so even if you think, you know, you're upset about raising tuition fees, or you're worried about like taxes, or you know, you're out to school, things like that, connecting it to everyday lives I think can help encourage people, but ultimately meeting them where they're at, making them feel empowered, you know, and hitting them, you know, individually, making sure that you're having those personal conversations and you're not just talking at people, but you're talking with people, I think is a really important way, because, you know, as students, we're always sitting in lecture, we're always being told what to do, okay, do this, A, B, C, and D, but we're not really told what we can do and what power we do have. And so I think that voting is definitely an important one, having those conversations, being involved in the community, you know, even volunteering for a weekend can really change your perspective about your role in your community. So I would make sure to encourage all youth to and everyone, especially in any low turnout group. I think for the midterms coming up, this is very essential. So making sure that they feel empowered, that, you know, you go with a friend, like it was mentioned earlier, making sure that it's your responsibility, that you're mobilizing your peers, your classmates, you know, those 5 minutes when you're waiting for class to start, just real quick, oh, have you registered to vote yet? Like, we got midterms coming up. You know, sometimes it can be awkward, but like I said earlier, we need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And as soon as we start to change our perspectives, I think it can really start to help us become more empowered. So yeah.
I love this question. If you wrote the Voting Rights Act of 2025, what new rights and protections would you include? What would be in there for you, the Voting Rights Act of 2025?
Whew, that's kind of complex. I'm still new to this. Can I pass it to my other panelists?
Maybe Secretary Weber, what would be on the top of your list? Voting Rights Act of 2025.
Well, first of all, I'd make sure that there are no barriers to voting. All these things that people have made up, that they continue to make up, and whether it's whether you have poll taxes, whether you have ID validation, so forth and so on, all those things need to be eliminated and should not be made to make sure of that. You know, as I think about an ideal world, I'd probably go to Australia and require everybody to vote. And if you don't, you have to pay. Australia charges you a tax if you don't vote in Australia. I mean, that's extremely important. It makes you realize how important it is. But we have to have something that people see that this is important that they do. And I think we'll let them work a lot in terms of feeling that they have the right not to vote and so forth and so on. And then the burden comes to the rest of us to basically carry the activities forward. And so I mean, those kinds of things I think are really important. But all the things that they have put barriers out there that we can't do, it should be in the Voting Rights Act, that if you are a person, you're a citizen in the United States, wherever you are, you have a right to vote. And there are some states that actually let people vote in prison because they still are citizens in the United States. They're still a citizen in that particular state. And whether or not the offense they committed or not, you're not going to let them vote. And yet people commit offenses, and sometimes 37 or 47, whatever number of felonies, and they still continue to vote. I mean, this is an interesting situation in which you exist. And so I would make it so that everyone can vote. If you're a citizen in this country and you're over the age of 18, you have a right to vote. And then we put in some things to help you make you vote, that help you go to vote. But surely you have the right to vote. And anything that takes away from it has an adverse effect on you. And we've seen how when people do get the right to vote, they're much more conscious citizens. They are much more active, involved in their community, those kinds of things. And they're more responsible because the things they want, they see, and whether it's potholes in the street or whatever it is, you don't vote, you don't get it. And so for me, I would really make sure that every person who's a citizen in the United States is registered to vote. They have the right to vote, and some have argued that we should automatically register them. And there's a bill that's working on that right now for automatic registration. But you know, just even the little bit that we've done, if we're at 84% of all eligible Californians are actually registered to vote right now. And we will continue to do that until we get to 100. So we have to make that happen, and it gets to a point where we have to, and we try and do things in schools. Kids need to learn early about voting, and they need to teach their parents about voting early, and it's a part of their life. Like I said, we walked up and down the driveway every election day because we knew voting was taking place in the living room, and we all grew up with that vision. And that was who we were, and to this day, we all still register to vote and all participate in elections.
And maybe your provision of no vote, no lunch or dinner. I think we could get 60 votes for that in the Senate.
Oh yeah,
I think.
Probably so. But definitely at your household, I can get 100%.
Well, you know, in the business of trying to convince people to go vote on a turnout basis, we've actually, in many cases, come up with the idea that dinner is served after you voted. Period. And you come to vote, we'll give you a ride to come to vote. We will feed you after you have voted, period. In other words, there should be incentives beyond just the dialogue coming from this stage, coming from elected officials. We really ought to be about encouraging and making it possible for people to really want to vote. And whatever it takes to achieve that goal is what we ought to be about. In Oakland, in the campaign that we had over there, Elihu Harris was the mayor of that city. He had been a member of the California legislature. He got heavily criticized by the press for having chicken dinners on the way out the door from voting, period, and making fun of that effort. And that effort increased turnout dramatically. Well, that ought to be replicated in multiple locations if that's what gets people to go to the polls and exercise their right and their privilege, period. The reference you made to Australia, one of the countries in which you penalize if you don't vote. That may very well be where we are about to arrive in this country, because for whatever reason, the more conservative people vote with enthusiasm, period. And the people who should be voting are not as enthusiastic about that act. Somehow, we the people in the world of politics, office holders and otherwise, newscasters and otherwise, we've got to make it so attractive that it's the first thing you do and you brag about it.
We have time for one more question. Something optimistic looking forward. I'll leave this one for you two, Lexie and Adam. What's something that gives you hope for the next generation of voters?
I think something that gives me hope that I see. So I have a 17-year-old nephew, a 14-year-old niece, and then a 5-year-old nephew. So something I see within them is that they are outspoken. So that is something I'm looking forward to with this next generation. And, you know, I think that with the next generation of voters, there's been a lot going on the last couple years that they've grown up with and have recognized that. So I feel like there must be some sort of spark. Maybe it may not be fully lit yet, but something that is driving them to have these conversations, to show up to vote and things like that. Something I forgot to mention earlier that I think is important also when we're discussing youth being involved is that there is, it's a common phrase with 16, 17-year-olds, 18, 19, 20, that, oh, you are the future, you are the next, people to go in office and things like that. But it's so important to remind them that they are the present too, and that, everything that is going on nowadays also directly affects them and will, affect their little siblings or in the future kids. So I think that is something that is important to recognize as well. But when it comes to looking forward to the next generation, the outspokenness and ultimately the creativity, I think that, in this day and age, so many people are really starting to get creative with the ideas. I spoke on a panel last year with some youth, and one of them was working on developing like a VR headset to get people educated on voting. So, it's things like that you wouldn't even think of 5-10 years ago, but something to really make it fun, engaging, and, like you were saying, Mr. Brown, make it exciting again and make sure that people feel enthusiastic. So I think that with the new developments that the new generation will be making, that, that will ignite a spark in them and help continue to move the movement. So, yeah.
And how about you, Adam? What's giving you hope?
Yeah, what's giving me hope is, to be honest, we see what happened, what's been happening in our country, right? And then knowing that this upcoming generation have witnessed that, right? So it's equivalent to me, like I'm a time traveler, like I'm witness. I wonder what it would be like if I was that young black boy witnessing several things in my neighborhood, right? That's going to influence me to do more. You know what I'm saying? That's going to influence me to change. And so when we look at, how we have access to the whole world in the palm of our hand, we gotta make voting look cool, right? Something that I do in my crew, right? We tagging each other, we going to the ballots, we doing all the TikTok dances and everything, right? We gotta talk their language, right? And so that's what gives me hope for this new generation. And then, you know, actually, when we look at entertainers nowadays, and I'm not saying this because I'm in that field as well, but when we look at entertainers nowadays, they're starting to understand they reach, right? And that's through social media. So when we have entertainers that's making voting looking good and having conversations and these real serious conversations, I think going forward we can see, okay, we're gonna see a whole change, and we're gonna see a shift. And not only that, when we are seeing younger people like myself, right? It's peers that's, you know what I'm saying, they in the Capitol, you know, and they not too much older than me, right? Isaac Bryan being one of them. I can literally go back to LA where I'm originally from, and I can see him and have a conversation with him, and we can discuss different ideas. So when we have people that's not only just look like us, but really represents us in that age bracket, no disrespect to anybody that's older, right? But we talking upcoming generation, right? Because 20 years from now, my story is going to be relevant, it's going to be important, but is it going to really resonate? And so that's what I'm hopeful for about this upcoming generation, and letting them know, hey, you got to pick a side. And it's sad to say, but if you're stuck in the middle, you're going to get hit. So, you know, and making it be cool so they can really understand. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Beals, I'll let you have the last word of the evening. As you look out on the landscape of this country, what's something that gives you hope about the next generation of voters?
As people complain, we have got to be prepared to point to how their complaints are connected to what's going on that they don't like. And so what gives me hope today is that people are becoming more alive, more angry, more upset, more aware, because they're sensitive to seeing things that they haven't seen before. The openness of media, no matter what kind it is, no matter how difficult it is to understand some of the very sad media that's off track, some of it that seems to be sidestepping the truth these days, still it is alive and well, and young people connect to something. And everybody that I run into, no matter what the occasion is, around the United States, as I give my seminars, everybody's complaining about something. And the first thing I say is, do you know how it got to be that way? You either didn't vote or you voted for the wrong person. One of the two things, right? And I say to everybody who says the thing, may you be blessed by whoever you voted for in the last election, okay? May their activity bless you. So I think we've got to really get with pointing out, and people are being aware. They're so aware these days. How did we get here? You're doing what? And that gives me hope, is that, you know, the old thing, who let the dogs out? Well, they're out. And people see them out, and they hear the growls, and they're waking up. And we have evidence that that awakening can save us, because I think that Mayor Brown is correct. We've got to save ourselves. We have never, ever been so deep in the rabbit holes we are now.
Well, I want to turn it back over to Secretary Weber, who's graciously hosted us today at the Secretary of State's office, for any closing remarks. But first, just a round of applause for all of our panel members today.
Well, let me thank my staff that's here, all of you who raised your hand, who worked on this project. I know I see Denise, I thought I saw Janelle somewhere back there. There she is, and some of the others. All the staff that worked on this, our tech staff, others who took this and ran with it. And I hope you get also a chance to go to see at the archives in the museum. With the information that they put out, it's really quite interesting, not only for the nation, but what happened in California with regards to the Voting Rights Act. That's very, very important. We are at a time frame, obviously, in our own lives where we have tremendous challenges that we're faced. And it's sometimes quite sad, at least it is for me, when I realize how far my parents had come, how hard they fought to get some rights for us, things that they needed to do, and then find us all of a sudden almost back at the bottom somewhere, questioning ourselves and our ability to move forward. and not defending what we need to defend in terms of what we must move forward to accomplish. I always tell everybody that, you know, climbing this ladder, when we think of the last 60 years and before, it was quite a journey. You know, it's hard to climb the mountain. It's treacherous and it's difficult, and yet our folks did that. They continued to do it, whether it was in Mississippi or California or Alabama or DC. They fought for the Voting Rights Act. They fought for women's right to vote, and now people are trying to take that away from women. All of these things are really important. Keep in mind, I tell young people, if climbing the mountain is hard, falling to the bottom is easy. One twist of the ankle, one step on the wrong rock, and you're back at the bottom. And we have to be conscious of that so that we're careful how we climb and that we consistently climb to get higher and higher. You cannot give up, and you cannot give out, and you cannot give in. Our ancestors fought too hard for this. And I sometimes say to myself, you know, I'm kind of glad my parents aren't alive to see how we're struggling so to get people to go to the polls, see how we're struggling to stand up for ourselves and to fight for the things that are so critically important. And I hate to say that I've never seen such scared people in all my life. You know, when I think about what Brother Brown went through in his groundbreaking activities at the Capitol and beyond, and I see folks that look like they're scared to death. They're scared to say, well, no, we're not gonna do that. That's not right. You know, we can't do this to people. We have to fight, and we have to fight on the principles that we fought for. Because I can tell you, once you lose your footing, and once you fall to the bottom, it will be difficult to climb that mountain again. And we cannot lose. So I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you here. Do all you can to learn about the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Do all you can to understand all of the things that are there. My staff has lots of material. We go out to high schools and register students. We go and register those who are new citizens. We're everywhere, in every fair in the state. My staff, I look at the list, and they're there basically talking about voting and the voting rights and what people need to do in terms of register them vote. And just remember, if your kids don't vote, do not feed them. They are already grown. They're over 18. Let them go get their own meal. If they can't help you win this battle, do not feed them. Thank you for coming.
All right, we're back. What an amazing conversation by the panel. It was so exciting to get to see that live and in person. I think there was a lot of valuable insight and perspectives from each member of the panel. Kalika, what are some of the highlights you took away?
There was so much from the conversation. Everyone had a unique perspective that they brought to the table, and I think all worked well together to highlight the Voting Rights Act and how it has shaped California voting rights and what we can do as we move forward in the future in this challenging environment. So it was a really great conversation. I enjoyed hearing everybody speak, and it was moderated by Guy Marzorati, who was amazing and was able to weave the conversation with expertise as we knew he would. So it was a great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like each panelist had a standout story or perspective that they brought to the table. Dr. Weber talking about how her dad had to flee Arkansas because of the refusal to pay his portion for sharecropping, and how when they got here to California, they took the power back and turned their home into a polling location. I think that's such a great story about taking power into your hand and encouraging your community to vote. Dr. Melba Pattillo Beals talking about how she was always an angry little girl, and that, you know, she doesn't let anyone boss her around, and, you know, again, taking the power back into her own hands. And I think that kind of turned well into the future of voting rights, and how the future of voting advocates kind of hold up the core tenets of the Voting Rights Act, especially with Lexie, who represents the Sacramento chapter of the California League of Women Voters. She talked about how she wants to see an election where there's a 100% turnout. They want to keep getting people to vote. And I think that Adam also highlighted that very, very well when he talked about how from when he was incarcerated and not eligible to vote because he was serving time inside a state prison, he still was an activist in making sure that people knew what their rights were when it came to voting, and how, California is one of the leading states in the nation restoring voting rights since 2020. With voting rights restored. And so making sure that people know that they have that right. And I think that really highlights exactly what Dr. Weber was talking about. The Voting Rights Act isn't necessarily about giving people the right to vote, but making sure that they're empowered to know their rights and get out and vote.
Yeah, I agree. What's interesting to me is that how similar Dr. Weber's story and Melba's story is to my own family story, and how my family is also from Arkansas originally. So those through lines were definitely interesting to hear from both of their perspectives. I think one of the things I enjoyed was Mayor Brown's story about how he was sort of led into activism, starting from protesting over food at school, because he was a nerd. And as a fellow nerd, I could relate, wanting to get more food compared to the athletes at the schools. And Guy called it protesting for nerds' rights, which I thought was really funny. Miss Melba was amazing in talking about how, as a girl, she didn't understand what disenfranchisement was. And she didn't understand why she had to sit at the back of the bus. She didn't understand why she couldn't, drink at a certain water fountain or had to step aside. And how that led to the person that she is today in the fight, how passionate she is about the fight. I thought was really moving. I think Lexie was great at providing a perspective of from the youth vote, taking the time to make the argument as to why voting is so important to your everyday life. The things that you care about at school. The secretary also talked about this as well. um, you know, if you show up to the polls, you have a say in maybe what some of those fees are that you may be maybe increasing at school every year. If you don't show up, you don't have a voice. And then you cannot speak to some of the things that maybe bother you about the things that are going on in your community. So the way that Lexi tied that together, I thought was really prescient. And then, of course, Adam. I think I was moved by him talking about how inside he and his fellow, the others inside, were still so interested in learning and organizing and wanting to be involved. And I think that that was a moving piece of the conversation from him, and definitely made me stand up and pay attention to what he was saying. And the interest of talking about why some of the formerly incarcerated don't participate. A lot of times they may not feel that they are knowledgeable in some of the things that are happening in our communities, and that may be intimidating them from wanting to participate in the voting process. So I thought they were all really amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there was one thing that Adam said specifically in relation to this kind of through line that we saw through kind of these different generations, so to speak, of the Voting Rights Act, the past in Dr. Weber and Dr. Melba Pattillo Beals and former Mayor Willie Brown, and then the future with Lexie and Adam, he was talking about Prop 17, and he said, when most people are getting out of incarceration, and this is not obviously ubiquitous for everyone because not everyone is incarcerated, but for the people getting out of incarceration, they're coming home and they need to establish a sense of community. And that's what programs like parole and probation do, is they try to reintegrate you back into a community. And part of being in a community is having a say in how that's ran. And voting goes right along with that, because you have to participate civically to be engaged with your community. And when you choose not to, or when you're given misinformation that you can't vote, like that young gentleman that Dr. Weber was talking about, who didn't know for 20 years that he was able to vote, you are either willingly or, unwillingly detached and disengaged from your community. And that leads to an impact. And that there's a quote that Dr. Weber said that when she said it, I just had to write it down word from word because it was so powerful. She said, when you don't have the power to vote, to get things done, you have no power at all. And I think that's like the biggest takeaway that anyone could take from this panel, that you have to take the power back and get out there and vote and know what your rights are and what access you have to the ballot so that you have a say in your community.
Absolutely. She also said something that struck me. She said, climbing the mountain is hard, but falling to the bottom is easy. And I think that was such a important thing, or important way to phrase it. This fight continues every single day, working towards expanding and improving the Voting Rights Act to include language communities and ensure access in underrepresented communities. That fight continues to happen every single day. And if we don't pay attention, if we're not active in our democracy, it's very easy to slip back down. And so many of our forefathers and ancestors worked hard to continue to expand rights for everyone. My mom often says this thing to me, and she's referring to our struggle in the Black community, but I feel it expands to everyone, that we come from a people, right? So, as we continue to expand and grow our democracy and make it more inclusive for everyone, we come from a people who before us stood and fought to expand voting rights, fought to expand rights for everyone, whatever that struggle or fight is. And I think it's good for us to remember that we come from a people, we have a lineage and ancestry who stood up to make sure that we all had a better life than they had. And that to me encompasses the Voting Rights Act of 1965, why I think we wanted to have this conversation with amazing leaders from all ends of the spectrum. And we hope that folks listening remember that we come from a people, whether you are a person of color, whether you are in a marginalized community, we come from a people. And if you look back in everyday life, we all stand up and speak our minds and try and move the conversation forward. And it was really great to hear everyone's perspective on where we've been and where we're going.
Absolutely. And I think everyone did that perfectly on the panel and got that message out there, that the legacy of the Voting Rights Act is about celebrating progress, hard fought progress, and strengthening democracy. Thank you to everyone for tuning in to the season 2 premiere of This Is Promote the Vote California, the podcast. And thank you again to our distinguished panelists and moderator, Guy Marzorati, for an amazing, insightful discussion and celebration of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The work isn't done, and neither are we. Make sure to come back here next week for another episode of This is Promote the Vote California, the podcast. Looking for ways to take action beyond just listening? Head over to promotethevoteca.sos.ca.gov, your one-stop shop for getting involved and making an impact in your community.
Let's be real, voting can feel like a lot. Whether you're registering to vote for the first time or planning a community pop-up, Promote the Vote California keeps it simple.
It's built for everyday people who want to make a difference. No politics, just participation.
Yep, that's promotethevoteca.sos.ca.gov. Save the link, spread the word, and show up for your community.
This is Promote the Vote California, the podcast. It's brought to you by the California Secretary of State's office. It's hosted by Kalika Edwards and me, Cameron Petrovich, election analysts and outreach coordinators for the California Secretary of State. Don't forget to tune in next week for another conversation on how we can build a stronger, more inclusive civic culture across California. To learn more about our program, visit promotethevoteca.sos.ca.gov.